I don't know how long I've been here. Time. It doesn't work right in this place. Sometimes an hour feels like a minute, a blink, and other times a single second stretches into an eternity. Thin and brittle like old glass about to shatter. They call me Lysandra, but the name feels borrowed, like a coat that doesn't quite fit, hanging loosely on shoulders that aren't mine. I woke up here, in this room, chamber 404. That's what the stark, black numerals painted on the heavy, pale gray door declare. 404, like an error message, something not found. Me, perhaps. The room itself is aggressively sterile, obsessively symmetrical. Bed centered perfectly. On one wall, a small, bolted-down metal desk and chair opposite it. A featureless metal cabinet beside the door. Everything is pale gray or off-white, except for one wall. That wall, it's covered in old, peeling wallpaper. A faded floral pattern, maybe roses or peonies, in sickly yellows and greens. It's the only thing in this room that feels out of place. The only hint of a past this place tries desperately to erase. The lights are the worst. Long fluorescent tubes recessed into the ceiling, humming constantly. A low, vibrating drone that sinks into your bones and never leaves. They never turn off. Not fully. At night, they dim to a weak, grayish glow that's somehow more oppressive than full brightness, casting long, distorted shadows that pool in the corners and seem to writhe just outside my peripheral vision. Sleep doesn't offer much escape. The hum vibrates through my skull, even in dreams. They tell me this is the Pennhurst Institute, a place for rest, for recalibration. Dr. Eris Thorne tells me this during our brief scheduled sessions. He sits opposite. Me, his posture immaculate, his gray suit unwrinkled. His calmness is unnerving, too perfect. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, rarely blink. They just watch, analyze. He asks questions, but they feel like tests, prompts designed to map my thoughts, not understand them. How are the thought patterns today, Lysandra? Are we maintaining equilibrium? Equilibrium. It feels like a cruel joke in a place where everything feels tilted, off balance. He prescribes medication, a milky white liquid delivered by the ID attendants 3 times a day. It tastes faintly of chalk and something else, metallic. For a few minutes after taking it, the world snaps into sharp focus. The hum fades slightly. The colors seem almost real. But then, the fog rolls back in, thicker than before, bringing with it a nauseating disorientation, a sense of déjà vu so strong it makes my teeth ache. The attendants, they are perhaps the most unsettling part of Pennhurst. Men and women, dressed in identical pale gray uniforms, moving with a quiet, disturbing synchronicity. They glide down the hallways, their footsteps almost silent on the polished floor. Their faces are fixed in placid, meaningless smiles that never reach their eyes. Empty eyes. They deliver meals, medication, check vitals, all with the same detached efficiency, repeating phrases like, "It's for your own good, Lysandra," or "Compliance ensures progress." Their movements are too precise, too coordinated. Sometimes, I see them in the corridor through the small reinforced window in my door, moving in unison, turning corners at the exact same angle, stopping and starting as if controlled by invisible strings. It's like watching a poorly programmed simulation, a glitch in the system. When I mention this to Dr. Thorne, he simply makes a note in his slim, black notebook and says, "Perceptual distortions are common during recovery, Lysandra. Focus on the routine." Routine. Breakfast at 7. Medication at 8. Session with Dr. Thorne, sometimes. Recreation hour, pacing the small, high-walled courtyard alone. Lunch at 12. Medication at 1. Quiet time, staring at the wallpaper. Dinner at 6. Medication at 7. Lights dim at 9. The relentless, suffocating predictability of it all is a different kind of madness. But it's the wallpaper I keep coming back to. In the dim light, or when the medication fogs my vision just right, the faded floral pattern seems to shift. Lines connect where they shouldn't, forming intricate geometric shapes, almost like blueprints or sigils. Sometimes I think I see faces within the blooms, their expressions contorted, eyes wide with silent screams, mouths stretched open. Then I blink, and it's just faded flowers again. Just peeling paper on a sterile wall. Dr. Thorne calls these pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see patterns in randomness. Another symptom, another deviation from the equilibrium they want me to achieve. But the feeling persists. The feeling that the wallpaper knows something, that it's trying to tell me something I'm not supposed to remember, a secret hidden in plain sight, mocking me with its faded, shifting patterns. I feel constantly observed, not just by Thorne during sessions, or the attendants on their rounds. There's a pressure behind the walls, under the floor, in the constant hum of the lights. A sense of being a specimen under a microscope. My every thought, every flicker of emotion, being recorded and analyzed. Is this recovery, or is it something else entirely? The other residents offer no comfort. They exist in their own loops. An old woman endlessly tracing patterns in the air. A man who rocks back and forth, whispering the same unintelligible phrase. And the whistler, a gaunt figure who shuffles the halls during recreation, emitting a thin, reedy whistle. A broken, repetitive tune that scrapes against my nerves. None of them meet my eyes. They are islands of isolated routine. Thorne encourages me to ignore them. Focus on your own process, Lysandra. Their paths are not yours. But how can I ignore them when their presence feels just as artificial, just as wrong as everything else here? Are they patients? Or are they part of the scenery? Actors in this strange play? The sense of displacement is profound. I don't feel like Lysandra. I feel like a collection of responses, anxieties, and fragmented images held together by routine and medication. Who was I before Chamber 404? What life existed beyond these pale gray walls and the humming lights? The questions echo in the forced silence, unanswered. Each day bleeds into the next, marked only by the sterile routine, the taste of chalky medicine, the unsettling presence of Thorne and his attendants, and the shifting, watching wallpaper. I am lost, adrift in a sea of clinical calm that feels more threatening than any storm. 404, not found. The error message defines my existence here. It happened during one of those fleeting moments of post-medication clarity. The world felt sharp, almost painfully real for a few precious minutes. The hum of the lights seemed fractionally lower, the gray walls less oppressive. My gaze, usually drifting or fixed on the hypnotic wallpaper, snagged on something near the floor. A slight irregularity where the ancient wallpaper met the smooth, gray floor skirting. A tiny tear, barely noticeable. Normally, I might have dismissed it. Another imperfection in a world striving for sterile order. But in that brief window of lucidity, a spark of something. Curiosity, defiance, ignited within me. My fingers, clumsy and trembling slightly, went to the edge of the tear. The paper was brittle, dry as old bone. It came away easily, revealing not the bare wall beneath, but a small, dark recess carved into the skirting board itself. My heart started to pound, a frantic drum against the sudden silence that seemed to have fallen over the room. Inside the hollow, almost invisible against the dark interior, was a small stack of something. Not a book, not a diary. They were index cards, perhaps a dozen of them, cut from thick cream-colored cardstock, yellowed and softened with age. They felt strangely warm to the touch. Or maybe that was just my own feverish hand. I pulled them out carefully, my breath held tight in my chest. The writing on them wasn't standard script. It was a mix of cramped, meticulous handwriting, a hand I didn't recognize, yet felt disturbingly familiar, and strange, precise geometric symbols. Triangles intersecting circles, lines bisecting squares, intricate patterns that echoed the unsettling shapes I sometimes saw lurking within the floral wallpaper. The symbols pulsed with a faint internal wrongness. They felt significant, laden, with a meaning just beyond my grasp. Most of the writing was fragmented, like notes jotted in haste or under duress. Phrases like procedural alignment or achieving baseline null were interspersed with complex diagrams and numerical sequences that meant nothing to me. Then, on one card, written with more clarity, I found it. A more complete phrase, though still broken. The correction requires symmetry. Angles must align. The silence is the form most pure. Imperfection cannot persist. Correction. Silence. My mind recoiled from the coldness of the words, the implication of detached, deliberate action. As I read that phrase, the silence is the form most pure. It hit me. Not a visual memory, but a sudden, overwhelming sensory recall. The cloying, sharp smell of industrial antiseptic, so strong it burned my nostrils, overlaid with a distinct coppery tang. The smell of old blood. And beneath it, faint but sharp, cutting through the imagined olfactory noise, a whistle. A thin, reedy, slightly off-key whistle, repeating the same broken, melancholic phrase. The whistler. The gaunt resident from the hallways. His tune. Why was his tune linked to this card, to these words about correction and silence? The connection sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. The clarity provided by the medication was already fading, the edges of the room beginning to blur, the ever-present hum rising in volume again. I quickly, desperately scanned the other cards. More symbols, more fragmented notes about angles, measurements, deviations, and tolerances. It felt like reading the technical specifications for something inhuman. Schematics for dismantling ATE, soul, perhaps. The handwriting, precise and controlled, seemed utterly at odds with the potential horror the words hinted at. One symbol appeared repeatedly, a complex knot of intersecting lines and arcs. It felt more familiar than the others, pulling at a thread deep within my fragmented memory. I traced it with a shaking finger, the texture of the old cardstock rough, beneath my skin. Why did it feel so important? The implications were terrifying. These weren't random jottings. They were records. Records of what? Procedures? Experiments? Corrections? And why were they hidden here, in my room, chamber 404? Was I meant to find them? Was it a test from Thorne? Or had someone else hidden them? A warning left behind? The brief lucidity was gone. The room swam slightly, the metallic taste of the medicine thick on my tongue. But the discovery had changed something. The vague unease had solidified into concrete fear, a chilling certainty that Penhurst Institute was not what it seemed. and that my connection to this place, to these cards, to the unsettling symbols, and the haunting whistle was far deeper and darker than simple amnesia. I quickly tucked the cards back into the recess, smoothing the torn wallpaper flap as best I could, though I knew the disturbance was there, a small scar on the room's sterile face. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The smell of antiseptic and blood lingered phantom-like in the air. The silence wasn't pure, it was heavy, waiting, and the error message, 404 not found, suddenly felt less like a description of my state and more like a fundamental truth about this place, hiding something terrible that was lost, or perhaps deliberately erased. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every distant sound seemed amplified. The faces in the wallpaper leered more openly. The geometric patterns pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. And echoing in the back of my mind, relentlessly, was the whistler's broken tune, now intertwined with the cold, clinical words from the hidden cards. The search for who I was had begun, but I was terrified of what I might find. Development. Rising. Action. The days following the discovery of the index cards became a tightrope walk between the chemically induced fog and moments of terrifying fractured insight. The medication, once just a part of the routine, now felt like a deliberate tool of obfuscation, blurring the edges of a reality I desperately needed to grasp. Yet, paradoxically, it was only in the brief clarity it offered that the inconsistencies became undeniable. Shadows became blatant impossibilities. I'd watch a shadow cast by the chair stretch towards the dim light source from the ceiling, not away from it. I'd place the worn bar of soap perfectly parallel to the edge of the sink, turn away for a second, and find it skewed by a few degrees, only for it to be perfectly aligned again moments later when I wasn't looking directly. It was as if the room itself was constantly correcting its own minor imperfections, maintaining a superficial order that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. My own behavior began to mirror this obsessive need for order. Finding the cards had unlocked something, a dormant compulsion. The few permitted items in my room, the thin blanket, the single book, a tattered collection of bland poetry, the cup, had to be arranged just so. Perfect right angles, exact symmetry. I'd spend hours adjusting the blanket fold by a millimeter, ensuring the book was precisely centered on the nightstand. A frantic energy buzzed beneath my skin, a desperate need to impose order on the encroaching chaos, both internal and external. The geometric symbols from the cards were everywhere now. I saw them in the cracks on the ceiling, in the water stains that sometimes appeared and disappeared on the floor, etched faintly onto the metal bed frame, and most vividly, swirling within, the hideous floral wallpaper. They seemed to follow me, demanding recognition, demanding understanding. I started sketching them compulsively on the back of the poetry book's title page with a fingernail, trying to find a pattern, a key. The whistler became a focal point of my fragmented investigation, his gaunt form shuffling down the hall, the reedy off-key tune drifting through the heavy air. It was the same melody fragment over and over, broken and hesitant. It scraped at my memory, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. I tried to catch his eye, to speak to him, but he remained locked in his own world, his eyes vacant. The whistle his only communication. The sound became less an annoyance and more a haunting refrain, the soundtrack to my confusion. My attempts to connect with other residents proved futile. They were like automatons. The woman tracing air patterns never varied her gestures. The rocking man's whispers remained unintelligible static. They seemed less like people suffering from mental illness and more like broken recordings, stuck on repeat. Were they real? Or just more props in this elaborate stage play designed for me? Dr. Thorne's sessions became more intense. He dropped the pretense of general well-being and focused on the specifics. Tell me about patterns, Lysandra. Do you appreciate symmetry? Order is comforting, isn't it? Predictability. His pale blue eyes seemed to bore into me, searching for a reaction, a confirmation. He'd hold up cards with Rorschach-like ink blots, asking me to find the symmetry, praising me quietly when I pointed out the perfect mirrored halves. He never asked about the index cards I'd found, but I felt certain he knew. The nightmares worsened. The labyrinth of broken mirrors became more vivid, more terrifying. The reflections staring back at me were distorted, sometimes monstrous, sometimes bearing the faces I saw in the wallpaper, sometimes just fragmented parts of myself, rearranged into grotesque asymmetries. I'd wake up gasping, the sheets soaked, not just in sweat, but sometimes with a slickness that felt thicker, darker, that vanished when the dim lights fully illuminated the room. The coppery smell would cling to the air for moments after waking. I made slow progress with the cards, cross-referencing the symbols, the fragmented phrases. It wasn't a language exactly, more like a procedural code. Notes on subjects, their deviations, the methods of correction. Angles of limbs, precise measurements, desired outcomes described with chilling detachment. Terms like harmonization, rectification, and final silence appeared frequently. It read like a manual for monstrous art. Then, one recreation hour, the whistling stopped. The hallway was silent, empty. The whistler was gone. I frantically asked an attendant, one with a particularly vacant smile. Resident, designation, whistler. There is no record of such an individual, Lysandra. Perhaps you were projecting? The denial was smooth, immediate, terrifyingly convincing. But I knew he had been real. I had heard him. His absence left a void, a silence that felt louder than his tune ever had. Was he corrected? Had his imperfection, his broken melody, been silenced permanently? The thought sent shivers down my spine. The cryptic notes on the cards took on a more sinister, immediate weight. Were these records of past events, or an ongoing process? Was I next? Driven by a renewed sense of urgency, I examined the cards again, focusing on the repeating, complex knot symbol. And then I saw it. Not on a card, but on my own skin. Hidden on the underside of my left wrist, usually covered by the sleeve of my gray uniform, was a small, faded mark. Not a birthmark. It looked more like an old, meticulously applied tattoo or brand. It was the exact same intricate knot symbol that appeared so frequently on the cards. The world tilted violently. This wasn't just something I'd found, it was something I carried, something marked onto me. The symbols weren't just observations, they were instructions, labels, identifiers. And the most complex symbol, the one that felt most familiar, was mine. I spent hours staring at the mark, tracing its lines, the implications crashing over me, in waves of nausea and terror. The cards weren't a warning to me. They were notes by me, or by the person I used to be before Penhurst, before the fog descended. The person Dr. Thorne was studying? The medication's effects seemed to shift again. Less fog, more jarring flashes of intense, violent imagery. A glint of metal under harsh light. The feeling of something yielding beneath pressure. The coppery. Taste? Overwhelming. The satisfying click of achieving perfect alignment. These weren't memories of violence. They felt like memories of perpetrating it. The wallpaper seemed to pulse constantly now, the faces writhing, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. The symmetry of the room felt less sterile and more intentional. A cage built not just for me, but by me, reflecting a broken internal logic. Dr. Thorne's calm demeanor now seemed predatory. His questions about order and patterns weren't therapeutic. They were data collection. He wasn't trying to heal me. He was trying to understand the mechanism of my madness. The final card I had found, the one describing the correction final and bearing my symbol, replayed in my mind. It didn't feel like a threat anymore. It felt like an instruction manual, a conclusion. I knew the next session with Thorne would be different. I had the pieces, fragmented and terrifying as they were. The cards, the symbol, the phantom smells and sounds, the missing whistler, the mirror nightmares, my own burgeoning obsession with symmetry. The picture was forming, and it was monstrous. The tightrope walk was over. I was falling, not into fog, but into a horrifying clarity. The equilibrium Thorne spoke of wasn't mental health. It was the stillness of perfected, silent symmetry, and I suspected, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that I was the one who craved it most. The next session began like all the others. The quiet click of the lock, the door swinging inward, Dr. Thorne entering with his unnerving calm, taking his seat opposite me. The pale gray room felt smaller today, the walls closer, the ever-present hum of the lights louder, more insistent, but something was different within me. The fog had receded, replaced by a brittle, high-strung clarity. The tremor in my hands was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt alien. Thorne began with his usual pleasantries, his voice smooth and measured. "And how are we feeling today, Lysandra? Any progress with integrating the routine?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply met his gaze, holding it, letting the silence stretch. For the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of something behind his pale blue eyes. Not concern, but perhaps anticipation? Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the pocket of my drab uniform. My fingers closed around the small stack of aged index cards. The feel of the rough cardstock was grounding, solid in a world that felt increasingly unreal, or perhaps too real. I laid them carefully on the metal desk between us, arranging them in a precise geometric pattern. The complex, not symbol facing up. Thorne's gaze flickered down to the cards, then back to my face. His expression remained placid, but a subtle tension entered his posture. He didn't speak, waiting. Then I pulled back the sleeve of my uniform, exposing the faded, intricate symbol branded onto the skin of my wrist. I placed my wrist beside the corresponding card on the table, the match undeniable. The silence in the room became absolute, even the hum of the lights seeming to hold its breath. "These aren't theories, Doctor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the confusion that had plagued me for so long. It sounded like someone else's voice, colder, more precise. "These are records, procedures, corrections, my procedures, my corrections." I watched his face, searching for the mask, to crack. It did, but not with shock. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips, a smile that held no warmth, only a chilling clinical satisfaction. He leaned back slightly in his chair, steepling his fingers. The pretense evaporated like mist. "Excellent. Lysandra," he said, his voice losing its therapeutic cadence, becoming sharper, more academic. Significant cognitive recovery. The mnemonic triggers embedded in the environmental stimuli, combined with the medication protocols, have finally yielded the desired reintegration. "This place," I whispered, the truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "It's not Penhurst, is it? Not a sanatorium?" Thorne shook his head, the smile widening fractionally. "A necessary fiction, tailored to your specific psychological profile. An environment designed to facilitate observation without triggering complete regression. This," he gestured around the room, "is State Penitentiary, Maximum Security Wing, Block D, and Chamber 404. Well, it serves multiple purposes: observation, containment, and, until recently, pre-procedural holding. I'm the architect?" The name felt right, clicking into place with horrifying resonance. "The architect of silence?" "Indeed," Thorne confirmed, picking up one of the cards, examining a symbol. "A unique case, a fascinating intersection of obsessive-compulsive disorder, spatial mathematical genius, and profound homicidal ideation centered around achieving aesthetic symmetry through the correction of perceived human flaws. Your methods were brutal, but undeniably precise. Art, as you called it." My mind flashed, not with fog, but with sharp, crystalline memories. The glint of metal, the coppery scent filling the air, the low, guttural sounds of resistance fading into that pure, perfect silence, the satisfying click of arranging limbs at just the right angles, the faces. Oh, the imperfect faces I had made symmetrical, peaceful. It wasn't horror I felt, but a cold, detached sense of accomplishment. "The Whistler?" I asked, my voice flat. "Subject 7. An earlier attempt at behavioral modification. Unsuccessful. His repetitive patterns became disruptive to the baseline environment. He required final correction," Thorne stated matter-of-factly, as if discussing a failed lab rat. "His disappearance served as a useful catalyst for your own reintegration process." As he spoke, the room began to glitch. The hideous floral wallpaper flickered like a bad projection, dissolving in patches to reveal cold, stained steel beneath. The hum of the lights stuttered, intensified, then cut out, plunging the room into the stark, emergency backup lighting. A harsh, unforgiving glare. The air grew colder. From hidden speakers, distorted and metallic, came the sound of whistling. Not the hesitant tune of the resident, but a perfect, endlessly looping, mechanical rendition of the melody. The soundtrack to my confinement, now stripped bare. "Why tell me now?" I asked, feeling strangely calm amidst the environmental collapse. The fear was gone, replaced by something else. Acceptance. Understanding. Thorne stood up, smoothing his suit jacket, unfazed by the flickering lights and decaying illusion. "Because, Lysandra, the observation phase is complete. Your unique contributions to behavioral science have been thoroughly documented. Unfortunately, reintegration into any societal structure is deemed impossible. The state has scheduled your final procedure." He didn't say execution. He said final procedure. The ultimate correction. He looked towards the heavy steel door, no longer pale gray, but scarred and menacing. "Transfer is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Consider this session your debriefing, and," his smile returned cold and final, "my professional courtesy. Resolution. Falling action." A strange serenity settled over me, cold and clear as ice water. The collapsing illusion of Penhurst didn't frighten me. It felt appropriate. The messy, imperfect facade finally giving way to the stark, symmetrical reality of steel and concrete. My reality. Block D, Chamber 404. Solitary confinement. Death row. The labels clicked into place, not with horror, but with a quiet sense of order restored. Thorne stood there, clipboard now in hand instead of his slim notebook, watching me with that same detached curiosity. He was just another element in the equation, another variable observed. His professional courtesy was merely the closing of a data file, an asymmetry that would soon be corrected. The heavy steel door groaned open, not with the quiet click I was used to, but with the harsh scrape of metal on metal. Two figures stood framed in the doorway, not the placid attendants in their pale, gray uniforms, but guards, stern-faced, clad in dark blue, their expressions unreadable, their presence solid and undeniably real. They carried restraints. They moved towards me, their steps heavy on the concrete floor now visible where the illusionary tiles had faded. I didn't resist. Resistance was asymmetrical, chaotic. Instead, I focused on the patterns. The way the emergency lights cast perfectly, parallel bars of shadow across the floor, the precise 90-degree angle of the door frame, the balanced stance of the guards. As they reached for my arms, my eyes drifted back to the desk where the index cards lay scattered, the meticulous symbols stark against the aged cardstock. My work, my art. Incomplete, perhaps, but aesthetically sound in its own terrible logic. A wave of something akin to pride washed over me, cold and sharp. I looked past the guards, down the corridor. It wasn't the softly lit, slightly disorienting hallway of Penhurst. It was a prison block, rows of identical steel doors under the harsh, flickering emergency lights. The air smelled of stale sweat, disinfectant, and despair. The real smell. And then, softly at first, rising from my own throat, unbidden yet perfectly controlled, came the whistle. Not the broken, hesitant tune of Subject 7, but the pure, complete melody. The melody from the cards, from my nightmares, from the music box that had always signaled the final silence. It echoed in the cold, concrete space, sharp and clear. The guards flinched slightly but tightened their grip, pulling me to my feet. I didn't fight. I allowed myself to be led, my steps falling, into a steady, even rhythm on the floor. My gaze remained fixed ahead, seeing the patterns in the repeating doors, the lines of the corridor converging towards a vanishing point. Perfect perspective. Dr. Thorne watched us go, his expression unchanging. He was already turning back to his clipboard, perhaps making his final notes on Subject 404, Lysandra, the architect of silence, a closed case. As we approached the end of the block, towards another heavy steel door, the one leading, presumably, to the final procedure chamber, I glanced towards the small observation windows set high in the walls of the cells we passed. For a moment, I thought I saw faces looking out, familiar faces. The old woman, her hands still tracing patterns. The rocking man, his lips moving silently. Subject 7, the whistler, his face pale but no longer vacant. And others, faces half remembered from the cards, from the swirling wallpaper, from the fragmented reflections in the mirror maze. They weren't screaming or afraid. They were smiling. Not the empty smiles of the attendants, but wide, knowing smiles. Smiles of understanding. Smiles of welcome. As if greeting one of their own, returning to the fold, completing the collection. Perfect symmetry. Were they real? Echoes? Figments created by my reintegrating mind, as Thorne called it? It didn't matter. They were part of the pattern now, part of the final, beautiful order. The guards pushed open the final door. Beyond it lay not a sterile gurney, but darkness, punctuated by the single, focused beam of an overhead light. The air here was thick, heavy with anticipation. The end of the line. My whistling continued, the melody clear and unwavering, a counterpoint to the heavy clang of the door as it shut behind me. The sound echoed in the small, dark space, a perfect loop. They say the lights in Chamber 404 never truly went out. They just shifted, changed, revealing different layers of reality, different cages. But now, facing the final darkness, I felt a sense of completion, the ultimate symmetry, the final silence. The procedure was about to begin. My art would finally be perfect, absolutely, perfectly silent.